I'll do a quick intro. We live? We are live. Okay. Flooded Cinema, episode 33. Bit of a funny coincidence since we're doing the occult episode today. And I'm joined by, of course, my lovely co-host Jack, but two other special guests. I've got Aram and Tim, who runs the Big Underwear YouTube channel. I think I've got the link in the description. Say hello, everyone.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello. So this is pretty much a brainchild of Aram today. These two movies, because you wanted to watch
Yes,
Empty Man, and we watched that, and then you thought, all right, well, that's a good one for discussion. So we did that in A Dark Song, and it turned out A Dark Song is one of your favorite movies, right, Tim?
Correct.
So I'm sure we've got lots and lots to discuss, I think.
you bet.
All right, let's start with The Empty Man. Do you want to give a relatively quick rundown of the plot synopsis, Aram?
Yeah, so the movie starts basically at a group of, hippies going through Bhutan. They are climbing a mountain, and at some point they cross a bridge, a very important recurring image in the movie, by the way, bridges. They pass a bridge, and something happens. Someone falls in the cave, and it ends up them being stuck in some cabin somewhere, and being picked off by a mysterious entity called the Empty Man. And then we are sent forward in time, because that was back in likelihood the Lord knows the 60s or 70s, I don't know. But we were sent forward in time, and then we follow the story of a detective. He is investigating the disappearance of a particular girl who goes to high school, and it's tied to a sort of a urban legend called the Empty Man.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, the premises of the urban legend follow sort of the beginning of the movie, and he goes through this rabbit hole. Murders occur, and then he stumbles into a cult that then eventually I can spoil whatever I want here, can I?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
spoilers for both these movies because there's no point talking about them
Yeah.
unless we spoil them. And I think as well,
Obviously.
even if you sort of know the spoilers, it doesn't really affect the movie experience too much. It's not like
Oh yeah.
like other famous movies with twists or anything like that, where I would say it affects it. Like the movies are cryptic enough that even if you sort of know what the ending is, it doesn't really give
Yeah.
away too much of what's going on.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was actually. Oh, sorry. You wanna go?
Yeah, so with these type of movies, 5 different people could watch them and they could get 10 different interpretations. So, yeah.
Yeah. This is actually this is gonna be interesting for later in the discussion, but I'd say I also got spoiled. I got completely spoiled on the movie in the beginning, but about the Empty Man, the end of the movie basically shows that the cult had actually manifested this person, the detective,
Mm-hmm.
La Sombra, his name was. They have manifested him. They had manifested him into existence through the power of their thoughts,
Yeah.
making him a tulpa,
Yeah.
which is very interesting. And he is possessed by a particular entity of some sort, and he turns out to be the Empty Man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you find out that this whole investigation that he's conducting is basically orchestrated by this cult
Mhm.
to, you'd probably know better what they were doing around, but to try to get him
It's like
to
priming
the
him.
place where he would, priming him to try to get him to the mental space where he could be the Empty Man. as it were.
Yes.
Hmm.
So the opening, to clarify, was in 1995, just
Okay.
Close
Yeah,
enough.
the date
Basically
sort
the
of
same
sorted,
thing.
yeah.
Before the internet, at the very least.
Yeah.
Different
Yeah.
different energy.
I suppose we should mention that in the opening when the group are hiking, they find that giant skeleton.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And that's so creepy. That's
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's probably some of the most effective sort of horror imagery I've seen since Alien.
yeah.
It's-
It's very reminiscent of that.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
opening scene.
Yes.
And I think let's go into Empty Man just from like film perspective, and then we can get into the themes. I think later on.
Yeah.
This is a great modern horror film. I really liked how, because it's pretty standard in a horror film. You have an opening that's like 5 minutes where you introduce the killer or the monster or whatever, and it kills some random bimbo at the beginning or whatever. But this movie, it uses that structure, but in a much more interesting way, because it's like basically the first 20 minutes of the film is an opening, and it functions
Yeah.
as like basically
it
a
isn't
prologue.
a short 5 minute
Yeah.
thing.
It's like a full-on prologue, and I really like how it does that. And then when you jump into the other story, it's so disconcerting. Like it really like
Yeah.
makes like, what's going on now? And
It almost primes it as that this next part you're jumping into is artificial
yeah,
in a way,
Oh,
Yeah.
because you've been from this sort of opening where you could almost like this opening you could almost take it and just make that the film.
Mm.
Like and you get some like the characters in it aren't terrible. You
Yeah.
get hints that about some interesting character work that could happen, and they aren't complete retards.
Yeah.
They go about these things in a relatively intelligent way,
yeah,
and you start to really sympathize with them, and then they meet, sort of, they sort of do come to an unceremonious sort of end,
yeah,
which is quite hard hitting.
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, and also in regards to the cinematography of this movie, it's very well made, as you mentioned. How usually they just introduce the villain or the scary monster or whatever that kills people. It's supposed to be as an introduction. However, in this specific movie, they use this as a literary tool. In literature, you usually start with something and then end with that very thing to tie the knot in the whole story. They
Yeah.
did that very well because this specific monster was supposed to be the foreshadowing of the end of the movie. In fact, at the end of the movie, they actually go back to that very scene they started with.
yeah.
So that's a very
Yeah.
strong literary tool that they used in cinematography, which actually gives it a very high quality.
Yeah, I think, and it's impressive it was a pretty low budget movie, and I think it didn't do well when it initially came out, but it's
No,
now since
yeah,
become like
it
a
was
bit of
really bad.
a sleeper hit, and I hope we can get if you're listening to this, I would say of the two, I would definitely recommend. I would say I probably preferred Empty Man a little bit more.
Yeah.
But both of these are great movies, and they're both sort of low budget movies that I think
Yeah.
don't necessarily. I don't know how you would pay
Yeah.
for them or anything,
It's-
but it's
The Empty Man is a film that, see, A Dark Song looks like its budget,
yeah,
whereas The Empty Man looks it looks considerably better than its budget would suggest.
What was
Literally,
its budget?
I'm trying to think. I remember we googled it when we first watched it.
Oh.
I forgot what it is now, but it
Oh,
looks
whatever.
better than
Alright,
what its
let me
budget
look it
was.
up then. Let me look it up then.
It had
But,
a $60 million budget.
16.
Yeah.
Damn,
16.
yeah, that's
But
pretty good.
Yeah.
But the only thing that belies it might be a bit low budget, and this is a really autistic, like nerd thing that I point out when we're watching it, was there's
Yeah,
a
that's
moment
what
of green screen with slightly odd parallax. That's it, and that's really autistic retardation.
Oh, was that in the snow at the beginning?
Yeah,
Yeah.
when
yeah.
they go
Yeah.
off that cliff.
Let me say
the
this
parallax
much.
is a
Let me
bit
say
awkward.
this much. We've been recently watching Fargo, this TV show. This is very
Yes.
tangential, but there's a part in Fargo season 1 where they're like in heavy snow, and that looked way worse than the effect in this movie.
Mhm.
And to be fair, this is a movie, so they probably had more time to make it. But this movie looks great. It's extremely well acted. Particularly the main guy is great. I really hope he can sort of like build off a career out of the cult hits of this
James
movie.
Badgedale is his name.
Yes,
Hmm.
he was really great.
I think I actually think there is a possibility of the Empty Man and the Dark Song being sort of in the similar scene of underground occult movies.
Mhm.
Not underground necessarily, but maybe some people get some inspiration in the future and make something of it. That type of inspiration, because they are very similar.
yeah,
in cinematography, perhaps you're better. You guys are better at that than I am at spotting those types of similarities. But I think dealing with these deep occult concepts,
Yeah.
they're both pretty good at it.
They're
I
both
was
like
actually about to
pretty.
say that earlier as well, by the way, Ram. Like that actually is very true in that these movies are, rather underground. You don't find them easily. Not as easily as the main horror movies such as Hereditary and all these other movies. You kind of have to look around to find these little gems around,
And
and they only do that
suspect
with an
that,
actual interest in the occult.
yeah, and I suspect that they've been pushed underground for a reason. Because like when you look at some of the reviews of say The Empty Man or A Dark Song, they are nowhere near generous enough towards these films. It's like they're getting average reviews of like 6 out of 10. It's like, come on. These are like 7, 8, maybe even a 9.
Yeah.
It's like these are excellent films.
Yeah.
And
I
they
think
both happen to be dealing with very well researched occultism.
yeah.
From what I could tell,
and I think
Tim would know more.
Another point to The Empty Man is it's a 2 hour and 20-minute film, and it feels like an hour and a half when you watch it because it's just you're so on the edge of your seat the whole time. Like I remember watching it, and at the end I looked up how long the film was. I was like, what the heck? Like that felt like at most an hour 40 or something. Like it does not feel like over 2 hour film, and the fact that it's $16 million budget and it's over 2 hour film, and everything they managed to get out of that movie, it's an extremely impressive film. I really hope, if you do it, if the director ever makes another movie, try and go see it in the cinema. That's all I'll say. Like, I don't know. I don't normally say stuff like that because it's kind of cringe to say, but I really, I was really impressed.
Now, by all means, this director definitely does deserve all the praise he can get, considering that, listen, I wouldn't even believe that this movie had a $16 million budget. I would have put it around $200 million. The way this was filmed and how the cinematography looks.
Yeah.
Basically, all the effects, it's very high quality.
Yeah.
I think.
I suppose, do you want to give a bit more of a overview of the plot? Because if we get right into the thematics, people could probably get lost without being grounded in exactly what's happening.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. But obviously, I also want to recommend watching that movie. It's that good. It's really good.
Yeah.
Both of the movies.
Should we let's maybe give an overview of A Dark Song as well, and then we can let people know if they don't want to get spoiled completely. Let's just do that. Let's do A Dark Song. Just do. Tim, do you want to give a quick overview of A Dark Song, and then we'll jump back?
Spoiler free or just?
Give an overview, not too spoilery. Yeah.
Sure. The movie is basically about a certain woman, not a middle-aged woman, kind of like in her 30s. She suffered some type of loss, and she seeks the help of the occult in order to get whatever she wants. She wants basically closure for something that's happened to her, and she doesn't know any other method. So she contacts this guy called Solomon, Mr. Solomon, in order to perform a ritual known as the Abramelin ritual, which, by the way, is a real ritual that was done by Aleister Crowley. So that will tie into how this movie is very well researched in the occult scene. She sets herself on this journey to complete this ritual. Things don't go as planned. Obviously, as she's an amateur, she has issues following orders from Mr. Solomon. Some of the things in the ritual goes haywire, and basically it's from there. You get to see what things go wrong and how she solves them, if she even does.
And probably the most terrific part of this film is it's set in Wales, which is pretty awful, man. I mean,
I think that adds on to the cinematography there, really, because it's supposed to be this like vast land with nothing, just you and nature.
Yeah. And again, this is another they don't even have the budget on the Wikipedia page, so it must be pretty small, but it's a really impressive movie.
It was made by an Irish production company, so I can't imagine the budget was particularly big.
It was just a couple cans of Guinness. But yeah, this movie as well is really great, and I thought this was a really unique film. It's just It was
Yeah,
almost like an occult version of Reservoir Dogs or something like that.
Yeah.
Is how I
The
kind of
idea-
describe it.
like in a lot of films, like you'd almost have all the build up sort of, and then there'd be a much shorter scene of a ritual at the very end or something, because I don't think a lot of people in common conception view rituals
Yeah,
as a days long process,
yeah,
especially unless you're say a Christian and you're used to it. They don't think about the fasting or any preparatory things you need to do before any type of ritual really.
yeah,
And this film, because I'm assuming based off how the characters speak about it, Aram would know, but it seemed to me quite well researched on how this type of occultism actually works, and
Yeah.
they take you through basically step by step
yeah,
through the view of this woman, how you have to go about arranging and organizing yourself for these rituals,
yeah,
Yeah.
which is fascinating in itself. Even if it hadn't had the good character stuff it does, or anything like that, if it hadn't had a good story, and it was still just these interesting descriptions of this ritual, it would still be an interesting film at least.
yeah,
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said about the ritualistic aspect of it. I really like how the movie really shows the excruciating parts
Mhm.
of these occult, superstitious rituals. I mean, you have parts where she has to, well, spoilers, obviously. Where you have parts where she's supposed to drink the guy's blood, perhaps vice versa.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's because she's like the focus or whatever.
Yeah.
She has to. She has to channel the power, and one part of it where Solomon pretty much drowns Sophia.
Yeah.
Yes, Solomon and Sophia. Those are important names to consider in
Yeah.
this. He basically drowns her and then resuscitates her immediately. Drowning maybe referring
Yeah,
to immediate
because
death, but
she had been dishonest to him,
yeah,
yeah.
and because
So yeah,
honesty was important for the ritual, wasn't it? You had to be.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
made her impure to have been dishonest, and they'd gotten far enough into the ritual that seriously messed
Yeah.
with it.
yeah,
And so he had to basically drown her and then resuscitate her to make
Yeah.
her pure again, a rebirth.
Very
there's a really interesting part there where he says, where he invokes the names of
Mm.
Oh yes,
Baal.
I have it written down.
Who was it again? What was it?
Horus, Orpheus, Baal, and Christ.
Christ. Yes.
Interesting. That ties interestingly to the beliefs of the occult as well. That they can invoke all of those and believe that it's
Yeah,
internally consistent.
yeah,
Well, there's a
but,
deeper thing to that as well. I think it was Horus that people usually compare to Christ, and that Horus
Yeah.
died when he was 33, and then they say that, yeah, well, Christ is just a fictional character based off of Horus. I know they'll make these weird claims. So that might tie into that as well, that some of these occultists generally do believe that these are all just like different manifestations of the same entities spread
Yeah.
around time.
yeah,
They also believe that good and evil exist as two competing metaphysical realities, which is contrary to
Yes.
Christianity,
yes,
where good is the only metaphysical reality and evil is the deprivation thereof.
yes,
Right.
Yeah, so occultists believe that they achieve ultimate synthesis, perhaps, by harnessing the power of evil and good.
Yeah. Because
So-
they also don't attach any moral sort of implication to it, do they?
Yeah, it becomes a de-ethicalized religion, so to speak. Where
yeah. There's no, like good
yeah.
and bad are both equal. They're two paths or two forces that are. It's because it's dualism basically. So.
Yeah.
Or
Which is precisely why, Aleister Crowley, for those of our viewers who might know him, his catchphrase, entire motto was, do as thou wilt. This is literally that entire point. You do as you will. Because the evil and good are just like opposite sides of a coin for them. It's not, there is actually no
Yeah.
moral, as you said, Jack. There is no moral emphasis on anything.
yes, and then the irony is, why are all their rituals them doing disgusting things as opposed to doing good things?
Yeah, that's interesting as well because I think
Because the thing that stood out to me was that it wasn't in this ritual, but they mentioned other rituals about how you would both fast from food and sex, and then later you would have orgies,
Yeah.
which isn't in this ritual. There's a funny part of the film
Yeah.
that involves that, in which Solomon tricks her into thinking it is just so he can masturbate. But
that interestingly actually has roots in like ancient paganism. You know the term "as above, so below."
Yeah.
That's supposed to be a divine, rather a divine interpretation of what happens on Earth. You know how you fast from food and sex, and then when a certain time comes, you engage in orgies. That's supposed to be a sort of harvest. In how on Earth we spend a long time planting seeds, waiting for it to grow, all that effort, right? Strain, and then at the end of it, we harvest it. We actually have fun. We have feasts. We have parties. That's what you just described is just a divine or a spiritual form of what happens physically.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, actually. I never considered it from that symbolic perspective.
Well, they do that a lot. Like, by the way, I'd like to drive this point home in how accurate this movie was. A Dark Song in the occult accuracy. Because I've seen many occult movies. Let's be honest. As Above, So Below, which was an okay movie, not as good as this one, I'd say. There's many other movies that deal with the occult in one way or the other. There is no movie that I've seen that was this accurate in regards to actual occult practices. Because, for very simple reasons, it actually dealt with real-life occult figures like Aleister Crowley. I'm pretty sure the director of this movie has read Liber 777, which is a book by Aleister Crowley, in his journals, in how he actually dealt with various rituals. And there is like bloodletting magic, there is sex magic in this movie, various things that exist in real life.
Yeah, it isn't. The occultism presented in this film is not your sort of standard of pop culture occultism. That it's been built up over time on top of itself and been so abstract from what occultism actually is. This is going back through research to what it originally was before all this pop cultural garbage was sort of added on top of what occultism is.
Yeah, like Ouija boards and stuff.
Yeah. There are no Ouija boards in this film.
Yeah, let's just say that.
Yeah. I just want to ask. I have something to say about that sort of a little bit contrasts to the Empty Man.
Yeah,
do we wanna go to the cross-examination, or do we want to continue sort of outlining both of the movies?
I reckon let's do all of a Dark Song, like basically what we want to say about that. Then we can talk about the Empty Man after that, and then compare and contrast.
We didn't mention what the last part of the Dark Song, by the way. Spoilers for anyone who wants to watch it. It's important.
I think all of us would say both of these are great films.
Yeah.
And as we said, even getting spoiled won't really ruin either of these movies too much. So, up to you if you want to listen. But yes, we're going to get into the more deep part of the discussion, I guess, now. So go ahead, Aram.
Yeah. Tim, it's your favorite movie. Do you want to detail the final part with the big drama and the big twist, or?
With the Dark Song? Sure.
Yeah.
As Flooded said, even if we do spoil the ending, it ultimately doesn't matter because of how the actual scene is built out. I have a very different interpretation of the ending than Flooded has. So, I personally believe it was a very Christian ending. Very obviously so, in fact. So what happens at the ending is... Should I just describe what happens?
Yeah.
So this woman, having gone through... Sophia, in this case, which is very interesting that her name is Sophia... having gone through so much of the hassle and effort in completing this ritual, at the end, what was driving her was her hatred, and she was willing to get revenge for her son, who was killed by occultists. He was kidnapped and sacrificed in a ritual.
And she wanted to use this ritual to get in contact with a guardian angel, and then ask a favor. I think she wanted to have them killed or whatever.
And sent to hell.
Yeah,
and an interesting factor there is that she wasn't actually sure what she wanted. She was in that mindset of I'll get there when I get there. Yeah. She was very angry and she was driven by her anger and her hatred. However, after experiencing, because the ritual reflects your own intentions with that ritual, after experiencing all the darkness that was following her, this dark cloud that was following her throughout this whole ritual, and what all of those things manifested, she was literally getting attacked by demons around the house.
Yeah, were they demons or were they the dead? Or...
Demons.
I still don't know how they
They were
their
demons.
They were
view of
demons.
Whatever works. Okay.
Man, she was getting attacked by demons. She was getting pushed left and right. There's a spiritual aspect to that as well. After she realized that all her hatred and her darkness has manifested in the form of demons having full control over her life, it finally clicks for her. This isn't the way. Her guardian angel appears. She looks at him, or the guardian angel, and she says, "All I want is, or the favor I want is, the power to forgive."
Mhm.
She realizes that all her hatred has caused her all this pain, and she just wants to forgive and get on with her life. And when she says that, the angel smiles. It's as if the angel thinks, now you get it.
Which
And instantly the
presumably-
whole house is cleansed. There's a white flash, which is supposed to be cinematographically, symbolic of purity and cleansing. There's even a scene that actually drives that home, in where she does a ritual burying by drowning the body of Mr. Solomon, who was killed, by the way. He wasn't killed. He died through an accident. And then she drives home with tears in her eyes, having been reborn as a new woman from this experience.
And I suppose, presumably, because they don't view these things as having a moral bent to them, do they? So I suppose if it was this Gnostic angel and she'd asked for forgiveness, the angel wouldn't really smile at that, because they don't associate it with a moral sort of thing.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Which is why I claim that this movie had a very Christian ending, considering that what the key to all of her problems in the end was forgiveness, which is a tenet in Christianity.
Yeah, that's true.
Of course. Yeah, I actually agree with Tim on this one, that it's a Christian interpretation, because if you think about it, after Solomon had gone that knife through his blubber, he succumbed to infection and died on his bed. And the ritual was pretty much broken. She was basically consumed by whatever astral world, and she tried to go outside, and she couldn't. She just circled back to the house somehow. And when night fell, the demons erupted from the cellar of the house, and they just took her, tore off one of her fingers, which she then later confirms that when she drives home, she confirms, this actually happened. That's sort of like the scar that she bore from that.
Which is interesting, by the way, and I will get further into this. The fingers have something very the fingers have a very symbolic value here. I will get into this later in the cross examination with the finger, something that I said with fingers in the Empty Man, and in this case with the Dog Song.
That's where the juicy stuff lies, man.
The fingers.
But why I think it's a Christian interpretation is the most accurate one, is because the spell was broken. The ritual was interrupted.
But by their own rules, it couldn't have been completed.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So the moment that the angel started manifesting its light, was when she said, I'm sorry. She was crawling out of the cellar. The demons were chasing after her, and then she came to the angel. She said, my favor is, I want to forgive. I want to be able to forgive. Now, the ambiguity there is that she still behaves as if it was the angel of the spell, of the ritual. But I think you can make the case that that's just her preconceived notion, and not any actual authority of the angel to follow the rule of the spell. So I think, in a way, you could say that there's also this trope in some in some fiction where if you ask for the wrong thing to a powerful being, like a supernatural being, the being will not follow the request, and it will instead punish you for asking the wrong thing. I think that sort of might have followed that. So I think the Christian interpretation makes most sense.
There's another thing to that, by the way. Sorry for cutting you off, Ram. In regards to Sophia, I actually think that she kind of represents humanity she's a very human character, if you really
Yeah.
think about it.
She's
She
very
she has
flawed.
a form of childish innocence throughout the whole movie. She is clueless about the occult.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
she doesn't know anything. Like everything she knows was taught to her by Mr. Solomon. Even then, it's just surface level stuff. She just wants to get on with the ritual and be done with it.
Yeah.
What's happened to her is she's gone through a horrific event, which she's trying to resolve in her own flawed understanding of the world. And at the end, she realizes that she was wrong. She apologizes, and she's led onto the correct path. Does this remind you guys of
Yeah.
anything?
Yeah.
It's the history of humanity.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah,
fallen.
yeah.
We've fallen. We've time and time again, as God has helped us, we have lost the way, started praying to pagan gods and whatnot, and then once we've been met with a greater ill fate, and we've gone through all that hardship, we
Yeah.
find our way back to God again. This is
Yeah.
a very human character, and it's very, again, her name is Sophia,
Yeah. The
which
more
means wisdom.
I completely agree with you now. Like I think it was the ambiguity at the end of it maybe sort of threw me a little bit when I first watched it, but now I'm hearing you guys talk about it, makes perfect sense. And then
Yeah.
beyond that, we have the fact that we know that biblically, Solomon, he died sort of, I mean, I think he died repentantly, and then we sort of get the fact that
No,
Oh,
in
yeah.
1 Kings 11, Solomon actually does die praying to pagan gods. However, God has mercy on his soul.
so he died. Okay, he
out of
doesn't die
respect to
repentantly.
David, King David. Yeah.
But then when Christ does the harrowing of hell, obviously Solomon is saved.
Yeah.
And then I think in the same way he dies unrepentantly, Solomon in the movie, and then when she gives him the water
Yeah.
death, that's a reference to the harrowing of hell. So
I think so too.
I think this movie has just blown my mind.
Here's the interesting part of that about that. Solomon in the movie, his final words are, "I have gloried his creation," something like that. Something very weirdly Christian. Like
It didn't.
off-putting
That
Christian.
stood out to me as not sounding particularly Gnostic. Like whose
Yeah.
creation are you glorifying?
Exactly. The occult tends to see, like, alchemy, which is heavily syncretized with modern occults, from what I've understood, seems to see the world as prima materia, eternal matter.
It's
God
Aristotelian.
as the and God as the great architect instead of great creator, because architects work with pre-existing matter.
Yeah.
So it just feels like there's a lot of depth to these names as symbols, and I think that's really important.
Yeah.
There's also something
We should probably say, just for if people aren't aware, Sophia means wisdom.
And Solomon took wisdom, and she was, and it's also good to remember that she was the channel for the spell, and he was using her as a sort of focus for the ritual,
as a vehicle towards the the paranormal.
You
Also,
wanted to say
Rob,
something?
Yeah, you and I, there's a theme in this movie which I love. This is an occult movie. However, this specific theme it gives me a lot of satisfaction. Me and you have talked about this around before.
Yeah.
In how a lot of the, like, I will bring this analogy to Saint Macarius, who used to be an occultist, who actually turned away from all that magic and paganism and actually became a Christian. He's a canonized saint in the Orthodox Church. Saint Macarius is, in that specific way of how people who deal with the hidden, which, by the way, occult literally means hidden, which goes back to how we say that these movies are kind of hidden from the public eye. Things that are hidden, and yet people go so deep into it to seek some higher truth.
Yeah.
But yet the truth is all around us in the form of the divine logos. That actually is very interesting how Mr. Solomon in that movie realizes, hey, I've been doing all this occult stuff, yet true greatness was in front of me the whole time. And I actually think that scene was him repenting.
Yeah.
He realized God was the truth all along. All this occult stuff, like, he actually turned away from that, and that's the very nice theme that I like in movies where it shows that all this occult stuff, it's really just LARP. If you want truth, it's right in front of you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I say amen to that. I think it's really important to see that both of the people in this movie are represented as sort of reprehensible people, really, because Solomon is a degenerate. He's a sort of like he's an alcoholic. He's generally just rude. He's not very
He's a bit of a
he's not
pervert
very
too.
polite.
He's a kind of overweight,
Yeah,
neckbeard occultist. Sort of
Yeah.
guy,
Not- not very flattering portrayal.
No.
Not
He's
at
so, and we should point out the acting is like pitch
Yeah.
perfect from both. I would say
Spectacular.
particularly Solomon's
Oh, yeah.
performance, the way he jumps between like being this sort of pathetic what's the job, man child type character, to then all of a sudden he switches, like he flicks a switch and he becomes like so harsh to her.
Yeah.
And it's like it is genuinely like uncomfortable when he's like yelling at her sometimes. It's
'Cause
great.
he sort of he uses
You know
his,
what I just realized?
his knowledge of the occult to gain power in their relationship, sort of.
Yeah.
In a way.
I just realized Mr. Solomon looks like the Coomer meme. So he, like this guy's balding and he has like
He's
a
literally a
ginger
soy
beard.
jack meme kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
hey, there's some truth behind that.
I want to point out that she's actually the worse than him,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
She's constantly dishonest. She's constantly fluctuating from what she wants and what she doesn't want. She's being uncompliant. She's
Yeah.
being
She outright lies, knowing
Yeah.
that the
Yeah,
lies
multiple
affect this
times.
ritual,
and
which can get them
she's
killed.
yeah,
Or, not just killed, but damned.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Her incompliance is out of pure spite, more spite than he shows. Like he's actually worried. He's worried for the structure of the ritual and the
Yeah.
consequences thereof, and she just doesn't care.
Yeah.
She's just angry at him. She's constantly doubting him, even though obvious miracles occur in the ritual.
Yeah. I just want to quickly point out why I thought of it. So she's Sophia, so she's wisdom. So at the beginning, she's the wisdom of the world, which before Christ was if someone screws you over, say someone steals your sheep, you go and you murder their family, and that's how things used to be done, basically. Or like you would go and you'd steal 10 sheep, and and then after Christ, it's forgiveness is that's the actual
Yeah.
wisdom of the world.
Yeah.
It's turning the other cheek.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like now that we're discussing it, like and the ideas are moving, I'm now like understanding this movie way more, and it's so good. I got it, yeah. But sorry, Aram, I interrupted you.
Yeah, it's okay. It's really important that we all get the ideas flowing. I actually want to move on to a little bit about the Empty Man and maybe compare them a little bit. I think
Okay.
it's they're both really interesting.
Does
My
anyone
main-
does anyone have any other
Yeah, absolutely.
final things they want to say about like a dark song before we start compare and contrast?
I found the idea of a demon or something coming to her in the form of her son.
Oh, that was creepy as.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
very
he
well
says,
done.
I'm just a demon. Like, I'm
Yeah,
just a
that
cunt
was
who's trying to
that was the
trick you.
incredible part. It was
Yeah.
the first encounter, because it's done purely through a voice behind locked doors.
Yeah.
And she's aware that it isn't actually her son. She's aware that
Yeah.
it's some demonic entity. But she sort of gives into it and plays along a bit.
Yeah.
And the first time she encounters it, it's her son's voice behind the door, and he's saying that there's a dog there with him, and it's gonna kill him.
Dog was dead outside. There was a corpse of the dog outside. So
Yeah.
that just shows like even there's a little bit of ambiguity, but I think that's supposed to denote that they're moving into the realm of the beyond. They're moving into the astral
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Noetic.
And this demon with the voice of her child sort of pretends that the child's being attacked from beyond the door by this demon,
Oh.
Yeah.
but she manages to sort of get away. And then later in the film, the demon comes again with the voice of her son, and she outright says, "You're not my." Oh no, she gives into it actually, and
Yeah.
refers to the demon as her son. And that's when the demon sort of spits back in her face and says, "I'm not your son.
Yeah, I'm
I'm
just.
some cunt trying
Yeah.
to trick you." And it's so uncanny and disturbing
Yeah.
having that delivered,
Oh.
but still with the voice of the young child.
Yeah.
It's this really unsettling juxtaposition between the two things.
There's,
incredibly
there's also like,
Extremely accurate portrayal of demons, by the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
In that they won't
Yeah.
just appear to you in a scary form.
Yeah.
More than usual, you just like. I've had this experience before, unfortunately, sometimes, like these are just in your head, obviously, but you'll hear like cackling hyenas, kind of like just like howling outside of your room sometime. Like that's basically a very accurate description of what demons are,
Yeah.
and that this movie drives that home deeply.
Yeah. There's also a dark humor angle from the "I'm just some cunt trying to trick
Yeah.
you." Like,
Yeah.
it's funny, but it's
Yeah.
creepy.
I think that's what makes this movie. Now I'm thinking about it again. Honestly, I might have to. I think I'm gonna have to give it like a 9 out of 10 because it's like it does have that.
Yeah.
It has that like little bit of comedy throughout it as well, but then it's also got the
It's
other
a comedy that
character.
arises not through jokes, but just through the
Yeah.
almost
Absurdity.
it's absurd in
Yeah.
a depressing way.
Yeah.
This sort of circumstance. Yeah.
Which is my
Yeah.
favorite sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, you like that stuff, Flooded, don't you?
It's very human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My final thoughts on the movie are in this little section is that I loved the atmosphere of it. The vast expanse of the wild outside give this sense of loneliness,
Yeah.
of isolation, and then the big, beautiful sort of mansion-esque house. It's just one house, but you really get to know that house, and it
Yeah.
feels so. It feels like each part of it is used to its utmost, and it feels like that house really was able to contain the entire profundity of the film, and that's
Yeah.
impressive. And it just feels very. It has this atmosphere to it that I just recommend watching.
Yeah. It because the movie
Another-
it doesn't. It, I think another movie that if I was ever going to like another thing that reminds me of this movie is, which I don't know if any of you guys have seen, is the movie Antichrist.
No.
And it's
I
like
haven't
this
seen that.
movie's like, have you seen it, any of you guys? No.
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 Oh well. Anyway, this movie's like
I-
the complete inversion of that movie, where that movie ends like horribly. Anyway, I do not recommend that movie. But yeah, this movie is great. What I was gonna say is this movie, it doesn't even feel like a low budget movie because like the constraints of the having it in the one house like works so organically to the film. You don't even notice that it's just two characters in one house for like an hour and a half. You don't think about it in the same way you would. Other sort of what's the word? Bottlenecks or bottle episodes or whatever. You don't really notice the fact that it's one location just because of how well they use. It's a lot like The Shining, I would say, is like another thing it reminds me of, like how effectively they use like a single location. Obviously, The Shining,
It's
it's
almost
yeah.
it's almost like The Shining, but the people in the house are trying to get in contact with
Yeah,
them.
it's different.
You're-
It's different to The Shining.
It's
Yeah.
an inverse Shining in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And also,
Um,
another biblical theme here. Them being in that vast wilderness in the middle of nowhere, that actually
Yeah.
is not a coincidence.
Yeah.
Another very obvious biblical theme in that man is a wanderer in a vast wilderness, going to a promised land, and this is apparent in Exodus with the children of Israel, having an exodus out of Egypt to Israel, and they walk 40 years in the wilderness to come to the promised land, a land that flows with milk and honey. And that's accurate for us as the children of Israel today, as Orthodox Christians. We are, living in this grand wilderness, which is our day-to-day lives, trying to hold ourselves from sin, to a promised land, which is heaven, a land that flows with milk and honey. In that specific case, she is in a grand wilderness,
Yeah.
going to something that she is looking forward to, which
My
is to meet her
my
son.
one question is, so we've had this sort of more higher level symbolic interpretation of the film as about the biblical Solomon and Sophia. How do you think her son being killed by occultists sort of fits in to that interpretation framework, if at all? Like I was just wondering then, like off the top of my head, like I don't know if anything immediately jumps to mind.
And that's the loss. That's actually a central aspect to the story. Without that story wouldn't make much of a sense.
Yeah.
Everything comes with a loss, even in the empty man. Like we'll get to this later with the cross-examination. It all starts with loss.
Yeah.
Someone has lost something that matters a lot to them.
Yeah.
This drives them off the path.
It's the
And
suffering
then it's
in
the,
life.
yeah.
Like that.
I want to. Yeah.
I think we're pretty much done with the Dark Song, unless anyone else
Yeah.
has got something else to say, and we can get into
I
the
have
empty
something
man.
very. I have a perfect bridge to get to the
All
cross-examination.
right, go for it. Go for it.
So the house in the wilderness parallels. First of all, it parallels the ark in the vast ocean of chaos. Because it's a place of safety in the sort of unknown wilderness. But I think house has been used as a symbol in a different tradition, rather the Freudian tradition, where the house represents the psyche. The house represents a psyche, and filling a house is your psyche being impressed by the external world. And Freud said that a light bulb in a dark house, a light bulb representing the ego, and the dark house represents the rest of the unconscious, where you don't know quite. Yeah. And I think that's actually important to the Empty Man in a few scenes there actually. In the Empty Man, you have the Tulpa, La Sombra. I don't remember his first name. La Sombra is an important aspect of the analysis of that movie as well.
James.
James La Sombra. Okay. James La Sombra, he is not real. He is a mental manifestation that becomes real. The house that he lives in, he didn't actually live in the real world until he's fully incarnated. I don't know. We'll get into the metaphysics of that later. The house, in reality, when he goes to the house once he's fully immersed with the entity, the house is empty.
Yeah.
And the house, reflecting the psyche, it means empty man. That's what it means.
Yeah.
And you see multiple scenes in the Empty Man where this dark creature, this Nyarlathotep type creature, we'll get to that later, something that Tim enlightened me about actually, the Lovecraftian subtext.
Yeah, you have that sort of big skeleton sort of thing, but then you have this sort of cloaked figure as well that appears twice in the film, I believe. Both
They seem to be connected. They
times
seem to do the same.
with the creation of an Empty Man, because you have the first Empty Man created in '95, and then you have La Sombra as well.
Yeah.
So that sort of figure appears for both times.
Oh yeah. You see the Empty Man entering houses all the time, because the first
Yes.
cabin was a house that the Empty Man entered into,
Yes.
and then killed everyone. Everyone died after he entered the house.
Yeah, I think more properly, I mean, like, because he's not technically the creature or the being isn't the Empty Man. Technically,
In the urban legend, he's referred to as the Empty Man.
yes, yeah,
But the actual conception of the Empty Man is the Tulpa,
yes. So the Empty Man. Well, yeah, the Empty Man is the
vessel.
conduit for this demonic entity.
Yeah.
This quote unquote Lovecraftian god. The Empty Man is the conduit for this Lovecraftian evil demonic god, basically.
Yeah. That's We'll get to that.
Is that what? Because I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
I do not understand whatever is metaphysics the right word for whatever this bizarre sort of belief system is. I don't quite get.
Oh well, Aram will
It seems
enlighten
so
us.
distant from sort of the Christian book, unlike a Dark Song, where that obviously has Christian elements directly in it, and is ultimately a Christian sort of story.
Yeah.
I couldn't quite fit that into the Empty Man.
Well,
so
look, I'll put it to you this
exactly.
way: the occultism in a Dark Song is a very explicit inversion of Christian morality and ritualism, etc.
Yeah.
Whereas
And
Empty Man is just
in-
Buddhism, basically.
Yeah, and I suppose in a Dark Song, that the universe of the film is a Christian one,
Yeah.
Yeah.
whereas the universe of the Empty Man, like
Buddhist.
its fictional universe, is not Christian.
Yeah.
The Christian God does not exist.
It's
in the
basically
universe.
Buddhism. It's not really quote unquote occultism. It's
I
Buddhism.
actually would not say that either, Flooded. I'll
All right.
because a lot of occultists use the logic of the manifestation of the world being a manifestation of the psyche,
Yes.
and the psyche being God,
Everything
and you
is
just have to
mind,
self-realize that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the logic of magic. Magic being
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
the
'cause
manifestation of the
isn't
mind.
the sort of one of the main tenets of Buddhism is that nothing is real, isn't it? That's
Pretty much,
one of the
yeah.
main
Well,
things.
they believe in this concept of something called Maya. There's like a veil above the world, so ultimately you can't know what's true and what's not. You just
Right.
experience it.
Hmm.
Roughly said. I mean, someone can correct me on that later.
Yeah. I'm not an expert on Buddhism, but I can definitely see. I will elaborate on the parallels that I see from what I've understood.
The Buddhism in the film's relatively strong, obviously, because the opening incident is in Nepal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it Bhutan actually?
Bhutan.
Bhutan,
Yeah.
sorry.
Same thing. Whatever.
I also made the mistake.
So gonna.
Uh,
I'm sorry to the Nepalese and Bhutanese listeners.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but you guys are
You,
the
you
same to me.
see Buddhist monks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Regarding the house symbolism that I was talking about earlier,
Yes.
we see these 2 or 3 sections of the movie where the empty man or the entity, let's call him Nyarlathotep, okay? He is attempting to enter the house in James James the Sombre's house and take him and kill him or whatever.
Yeah.
It's each time it gets closer and closer, and that's clearly means that if we're to take the house as the as a metaphor for the psyche, I think that clearly just it's about the empty man, and
Yeah.
that's where you see the symbological depths of the empty man, and I think that's important to think of it that deeply.
Yeah.
Something we forgot to do, by the way, for all the people listening, the tulpa. To explain quickly what a tulpa is, for
Yeah.
those who
Okay.
don't know,
Go ahead.
a tulpa is basically a mental manifestation of a figure or whatever. It could be a personification of something that you in your mind imagine. It's basically when you were a kid, you had the imaginary friend. It's that taken to the next step. You actually manifest it in physical form in front of you. You imagine like it's right in front of you. You talk to it. You give it a personality. You give it a mental state, a mind,
Yeah.
and over time you train it, and it becomes more and more real over time. That's what a tulpa is. It's a very real occult practice. So
Yeah.
this isn't
Yeah.
something the movie made up. It's a very real thing.
Yeah. And I
And
mean,
they
it's something you
do they
can.
actually believe that these tulpas can be the vessels for spirits, or
The idea is that it doesn't really matter. Like, the idea is that because the mental world and the real world, there's no real distinction between those two things. Like, if you think hard enough about something, it is real anyways. So insofar as even if you think of a vessel, that's as good as an actual real, quote unquote, real vessel.
right.
Now, in the universe that this movie is set out on, this actually plays an even, I would say, even a stronger role, considering that they have a mantra throughout. You know, like when they would sit down in their own. What was the place
Yes.
called, the organization around?
It's what's
Pontifex.
called the Pontifex.
Pontifex Institute. So they would sit in there and they would repeat this mantra, like, belief creates reality, reality creates power, something like that. They would repeat this stuff.
It was,
And that's exactly.
and I wanted to actually discuss that. It was, oh damn, I don't have my notes here. But basically, they said, like, nothing's real. Even if it is real, it can't be communicated. Even if it can be communicated, it can't be understood. And then obviously, let's do a quick J Dyer apologetics here. That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense because because you're technically communicating an idea that should be understood by saying that nothing can be understood. So it's self-refuting. It's Aristotle, self-contradiction. And this is why I'm not
It's
a
the
Buddhist.
whole idea of making the statement of there are no absolute truths.
Yeah.
That statement itself is an absolute
Yeah,
truth.
is that an absolute truth? Exactly.
Yeah. So
Absolute truths obviously exist. Through the statement, there are none.
yeah.
You know.
So we're
Exactly.
obviously we're all Orthodox Christian here, and
Yeah.
so we're not Buddhists, but I can see how that line of thinking to someone who isn't trained in or isn't aware of like transcendental
If you're like,
argumentation.
if you're some atheist who's not happy with their life, and your first exposure to any sort of spiritual thinking is this, then I could see how,
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I think, I think it's very important to understand that we're definitely not advocating for these worldviews. We are actually just
No.
making an analysis. Absolutely not. Yeah, we're making an analysis here about what people might actually believe and why it's ridiculous. So, but we're trying to go as in depth as possible anyway, because
Yeah.
we're having fun with movies, obviously.
Yeah.
In regards to, by the way, the metaphysics of the empty man. Now, this is my own personal interpretation. You guys are welcome to disagree. I actually tie this into a very Lovecraftian, like a heavily Lovecraftian theme.
Yes.
In where, you know, let's actually just very quickly just talk about what horror actually is. Horror, in its essence, is supposed to scare you. Now, what is man scared of? Man is scared of that which he doesn't understand, the unknown. Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft, is a genius writer, and he would, as an author, he would always drive home that specific point. He used that as an anchor, that I will make this theme. He called it cosmic horror in Eldritch.
Yeah.
Something couldn't be understood, and that's the entire horror point. That there is this huge, vast thing which you can't understand, and in front of it you are insignificant. Your life, your everything is insignificant in front of this vast thing that you will never understand. So that's the specific horror that I saw in an Empty Man, or in the Empty Man, and where they keep driving home this point that anything we do, anything we think of, anything we engage in, ultimately doesn't matter because we can't understand it. You know, even if we know it, we can't understand it. It's that entire mantra. It's extremely Lovecraftian, and that itself is a horror element.
Yeah. I'd say where the differences between the classical Lovecraftian mythos and its style of writing these horrific deities, and the difference between that and the Empty Man and the entity is that the entity is deeply intertwined in human actions.
Yeah.
And that ties closer to another rather interesting character in Lovecraft's theme, which Tim actually enlightened me about. Nyarlathotep. There's a scene where when the Empty Man enters, when the entity enters the Empty Man, who is James Lasombra, he closely resembles the depiction of Nyarlathotep in this one
the tentacle sort of thing.
Yeah, which is very similar to, which is very Giger-esque. It's very similar to Alien. Like obviously that was what that was about, and I think it works perfectly. It works
Me
really
and
well.
Aram were watching this movie together actually, and when I
Yeah.
pointed this out, I actually thought, hold on, I need to Google this because this is way too obvious. There's no way this isn't Nyarlathotep.
Yeah.
Someone on a different forum had pointed this out like a year ago, and they said that in the scene where they're circling around, like James Lasombra drives out to the woods, and there's the Pontifex Institute people. They're out on a camp somewhere, and they're circling this big bonfire. They're repeating the word Nyarlathotep.
Nyarlathotep. Exactly like that.
Exactly. You guys can look up that scene. They're actually whispering.
I
that.
didn't spot that.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
I didn't spot that either. It's Tim's observation.
Damn, that's a
it's
good
very
one, bro.
interesting. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't mine. I looked it up, but the
Good looking up.
the character was very very similar to Nyarlathotep.
Yeah.
So
I just
that
want to
must have
quickly
been
point
it.
out that that's one of the best horror scenes in any horror movie I've ever watched. Like when he goes and
That
sings.
bonfire.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah,
that.
that's an incredible.
Oh, it gives me chills
There
just
should be
thinking
more
about
of
that.
that. There should be
Yeah.
way more of that.
That,
That
like,
is such a perfectly shot, timed
Yeah.
scene. It's incredible.
Oh, and then they
I saw
stop,
it.
and then they
Yeah.
turn. Oh, it is so.
Yeah. And then he has the best reaction of just nah. He just says nah.
I mean, that's I thought that was great because it's like that's exactly what I would say. Or like,
Yeah.
I mean, I would have
It was
left
very
way
human
sooner.
reaction.
As soon as I saw the fire,
Yeah.
I would have left. But I love that scene. Is so
How does-
effective.
How does the fire sort of morphing into that giant pillar? How does that tie into their sort of?
Because they're collectively they're collectively willing it into existence.
Okay, right.
I'm gonna be honest. I'd be less creeped out by that bonfire thing than I would be actually seeing Bohemian Grove. Bohemian Grove is creepier.
Yeah, and
Which
that's
is-
the other interesting thing about this movie is that's clearly
Yeah,
a
it's
direct
really-
reference, that scene, to Alex Jones seeing the bonfire.
Yeah.
That's what I thought when I watched it. I'm like, this is a direct reference to the footage that Alex Jones got at Bohemian Grove, which I'm just. Now this is maybe this is not very optical to talk about this on the algorithm to say Alex Jones and Bohemian Grove at the same time, but
Lord Voldemort. It's Lord Voldemort.
yeah, but
as a certain Jay Dyer says.
so I thought it was this movie seems to be basically an explication of what the elites think, and that's what I
being
got
able
out
to
of the
will
film.
things into existence.
Yeah. Which I mean, that is
Yeah.
basically because they're
They're anti-reality, and they're
Yeah.
attempting to shape the world into what they think it should be, or what
Yeah.
it can be,
yeah
regardless
It's
of how it
postmodern.
actually is.
yeah.
It's postmodern.
You know what's
But,
interesting? You guys know like the Saturn, like signals from Saturn type thing, where people think that the elite are receiving signals from Saturn, because there's a hexagon on the top of Saturn.
Yes.
Which is
That
the
was an
black.
Let's
interesting
be
thing I
off.
found in
Okay,
this movie.
be careful here. Be careful.
Yeah, no, I'm just tying that quickly into the Empty Man, where they said that they're receiving signals from him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He gives them messages, and they're interpreting that
the
all the
empty
time.
man is the way they receive the signals from this entity or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
the conduit. The empty
So,
man is the conduit for this being.
what does his name mean? La Sombra, like
That's
the sleeper.
I think it means the shadow.
Oh,
I
okay.
think the darkness, something like that.
Okay.
What does Umbra mean? I don't quite remember.
Umbral is like a
Shadow, the edge of the shadow.
Yeah, umbral
Comes from Las
Yeah,
Sombras,
yeah.
Spanish for vampire.
Ah, okay.
Interesting. Which is obviously connected to that sort of idea to a degree. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Umbra, as in UMBRA,
yeah.
means fully shaded inner region of a shadow cast by an opaque object.
Mm.
Especially, but okay, so it's not an opaque object; it's shadow thereof. It can mean shadow or darkness. So I think that likely has something to do with he's
So
not really a man.
if he's the shadow,
yeah.
that means he's like it's Plato's cave. So he's the shadow, and then the entity is the fire, I guess, casting it, or maybe he's supposed to be the object casting the shadow.
Interesting that you tied the Plato's cave into that. I didn't
Wow.
think about that connection. I don't know. I don't know how that I don't know how that metaphor.
That's what I sort of
ties
that's what I sort of think then, because he would be the object that the entity is the light, and then he's the object, and then
Yeah.
or he's the he's the shadow or something. But that's crazy, yeah. I'm blowing my own mind now.
Damn.
Blowing my own damn
That
mind.
actually is very interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is very interesting. Yeah, you can wait.
I wanted to reflect on one particular murder scene in this,
Go for it.
where there's this girl. She's in a spa.
Oh.
She is she's in a spa. She's looking into a mirror, and the mirror
this
is
is a scene that sort of confuses me a bit.
Yeah,
Exactly.
all deconstructed
Okay.
right here and now. So she's basically she's looking into the mirror, and the mirror is reflecting the mirror behind it. Now in symbolism, occult or maybe perhaps otherwise, this symbolizes passage into the other world. It because a mirror mirrors reflect obviously it reflects you but inverted, and there's a lot of that sort of that could symbolize a lot, but for the occult it could symbolize the noetic or the noosphere. It even says the noosphere in the movie. That's what they refer to as the noetic, and as the mental, as a psychological, psychic. And then what happens is that she undresses. So this means removing from yourself everything that removing yourself bare. And she enters into the misty shower. Mist meaning obscurity, and
the sort of connection between worlds, isn't it? With mist, it's like
yeah.
mist could be like a halfway between the solid and the insolid, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that's a good explication of that, because
I think fairies in like sort of Celtic folklore appear in mist and stuff like that because it's a
fog.
gateway.
Yeah.
Yeah, fog and
Yeah.
mist. Yeah.
What happens is that you see this dark entity, the empty man in the urban the urban legend that's named the empty man. He goes in there and murders her with a scissor, but then it's shown that she's stabbing herself, so it's a mental thing. She's doing it to herself. What this shows, I think that this in particular has this many symbolic layers to show that what is going on in this movie is that people are passing from the intelligible to the unintelligible, or the that's maybe not the right word for it, the reasonable into the unreasonable, or the
Yeah.
sort of real world into the unreal.
So
these deaths, because you also have that other group of kids that hang themselves, and they hang themselves on a bridge, which is a connection between two spaces, sort of. Yeah.
The bridge being the perfect symbol for that, of course.
The other thing I wanted to quickly point out was the bottles. So the bottles are empty. So the bottles represent the empty man again, because it's someone. So when you blow into a bottle, because obviously breath equals life equals spirit equals soul. So when you're blowing into a bottle and you're making, let me see if I've got a bottle here. Let's see if I can do this.
Let's go. Nice.
So when I'm making that noise, I'm blowing into I don't know how loud that was.
We got it. We got it.
Yeah.
That was loud enough.
Intelligible.
So when you're blowing into the bottle, so me blowing into the bottle, I'm the entity, and then again, the bottle is the conduit, and then the sound you hear is the signal. So the sound is so again, it's Plato's cave again, but in another form.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because that's part of the. I don't know if we mentioned that, but that's part of the urban legend. We didn't explain the urban legend itself, did we?
No, we did not. Actually.
The urban legend thing is, I think, part of why this film didn't perform as well, because in all of the sort of advertisements for this film, they highlighted the urban legend part, which really isn't sort of the meat of this film's story, really.
No.
So it made this film kind of come across as just being something like the Slender Man or the Bye Bye Man,
Yeah, it cheapened it.
Appeared to be that tier of sort of film, which this is not at all.
Yeah.
Not only is it not that film, it's probably one of the greatest horror films like the last 10 years. That's how far removed it is from that tier of filmmaking.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Also, another thing, both of these movies,
mean.
both of these movies actually start off with loss.
Yeah.
There's similar structural things. So we have the guilt of La Sombra, because he's sleeping with that other woman, and then at the same time his family are killed. And then interestingly, Sophia, the implication is that she was sleeping with a man when her son was killed.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that at one point, the demon, the demon in the form of her son, asks her, "Were you with that man?" So the implication being, "Oh, were you having an affair, sleeping with that guy when I was being killed?" So it's the exact same thing again, and it's interesting, that it's
except that in A Dark Song, it's real. Was obviously in The Empty Man.
Yes.
Like his wife and child never actually existed, and the woman he's having an affair with is a part of the cult.
Yeah, but it's just interesting to me that both of these films have like adultery and fornication as well, specifically adultery as this transgression that opens you up to demons, which is pretty true. That's real.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
I have a question for you guys, and I said earlier that I would touch on this. The fingers, the character in The Empty Man in the beginning, it's this big skeleton guy, which Aram and I thought was a Nephilim, which very well might be based off a Nephilim still. He had a lot of fingers.
Yeah,
like
he
more
had
than
12, I think I counted them, something like that.
And then there's a finger being cut off from Sophia's hand. What do you guys think any of this means?
I figured that the finger in A Dark Song was just purely so aware that she would know that it was real. It was a physical indication on her body of what had happened.
So they took it from, it was her Was it her middle finger or her ring finger?
It was her ring finger. It was her ring finger.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's also interesting.
I think I think there's a level of it, so we know it's real. But I think there is certain symbolism to fingers, like as we would understand as Orthodox Christians. Like every icon we have, the saints hold their hands in particular ways because they mean certain things, you know. And then there's even gang signs that the homies throw up.
Yeah.
So hands and fingers obviously represent certain things. I'll be honest, I don't know what it means in these particular two movies. I suspect that if I did a quick Google search for 10, 15 minutes, I could probably look up what specifically the right hand ring finger means. Ring finger. Thank you very much, Paul. Paul's jumped in and he's in the chat and he said, ring finger symbolizes marriage. She's punished for her infidelity.
Okay.
Correct. And I was actually going to go into this. Why specifically her ring finger? That's what Paul says is very correct. It's supposed to be marriage. In this case, it could be in a spiritual sense where she's married to that form of lifestyle. And have you considered that directly after her finger is cut, she starts apologizing? That's a form of penance. The finger being cut off, I think, symbolized penance. From right after that, she starts apologizing. She starts moving her way up to the room. And fingers in symbolism, obviously fingers, we use them for things. We use them to pick things up. They're tools for us, mechanical tools. They're also used for a variety of other instances. For example, we point them towards things. So fingers can be tools for direction. Now that could be physical direction. We could point people towards west, east, northwest, or all these compass directions, or they could mean spiritual things. For example, in Islam, for people of the Islamic faith, they would know that the Tawheed, when you point upwards, you're pointing towards God. That's like a declaration of your faith. Or in Christianity, when we do the benediction with our fingers, that's supposed to represent something holy. Or if you want to go the dark route in occultism, by Eliphas Levi there is this painting he's made of the Baphomet. It's one finger pointing upwards, the other downwards, the left hand, right hand path. Those are directions. Those are spiritual directions that they're pointing towards. Now I'm thinking there's a sense to this as well, in that there was a direction she was going which was cut off.
Yeah.
So there's two sides to that.
Yeah.
In the Empty Man, we see.
Since we've mentioned it,
Go ahead.
how does that sort of 12-fingered sort of multi-limb skeleton actually fit into their worldview? Because it had seemed to be a very sort of mental thing, whereas that skeleton is obviously a very physical evidence of some sort of supernatural entity. And
Here's the thing. Here's the thing.
You know what I think about that in regards to the many fingers? You know how I mentioned fingers can resemble direction?
Yeah.
Direction could also be some sort of worldview, or direction spiritually. Having like 12 fingers on each hand, 24 in total, that could be like a homage to that specific metaphysical reality that they live in which there is endless realities, right? So those multitude of fingers could represent specifically that there is, way more than one direction.
Yeah.
Or more directions than usual that one could go. In considering that Buddhists believe in reincarnation and all these different concepts in the world, like reincarnates itself and there's endless universes, etc. I think that might have been symbolic for that.
Yeah.
Because I don't like to assume that things just are in there for no reason.
No, well, particularly with these films. But I just want to point out quickly, Robo Chief has said here there's no free will in these movies. And I would disagree, because I think there's free will in A Dark Song, because at the end she chooses to repent, basically. But The Empty Man, as a much more nihilistic, deterministic film, there isn't really free will, I would say,
the world it's set in isn't a Christian world.
Regarding the fingers in the skeleton, actually, in a lot
of the skeleton itself, like how does this physical supernatural being fit into their worldview?
So I think at one point
there's a hint. I know specifically where the hint is. Do you guys remember? Excuse me for interrupting by that, but I just need to get this through.
Go for it.
Do you guys remember this? Do you guys remember this like hippie nerd little shit, who
Yeah.
gets beaten up and maced by James Assombra.
The
Oh,
one
yeah.
he kidnapped.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
The cult member that he kidnaps. Yeah.
yeah. He says they're in the noosphere. It's the sum of all consciousness. There exist also other types of minds, much more ancient, and he specified not humans, other types of minds basically. And I think he means something different in the past, and I think that's what we mean by Nephilim. The Nephilim were these chaotic offspring of the sort of divine and human, and the Nephilim were sort of this also represents this mediation between the angelic, the noetic,
specifically
and the human.
demonic.
Yeah. Because it's also shown in I think the Book of Enoch specifically. It shows that the fallen angels, they teach humans weaponry, they teach them makeup, they teach them deception, they teach them magic.
Yeah.
They also they interbreed with them, don't they?
Yeah, that's
Or
also what they
somehow
do.
create hybrids.
Yeah, I'm not an
That's-
expert on that. I believe
We were actually
Cabane the Christian has like a good article, I believe, actually on the Nephilim, like what the actual deal was with them.
Yeah.
Shout out to Cabane, he's got a great channel as well.
Yeah, he's great. He's really good.
Damn, what was I going to say? Oh, but at another point later in the film as well, the chick with the bob haircut, she says, "Oh, before, we've had two vessels before that she's aware of. There's one 500 years ago, and then the last one lasted for 20 something years." Is what she says. So I was curious, who was around 500 years ago? That so clearly the previous one lasted for 500 years, whoever that was.
well, it could have been
That weird
that
entity.
skeleton thing.
Yeah.
Or
Or
perhaps if an empty man lasts long enough, it starts to take on the physical.
yeah,
They transform maybe.
yeah. So it could be that, or I tried to have a
Because
look.
because that's when the second one starts becoming empty man, is after he comes into contact with that skeleton.
Yeah,
And James has to be near the
yeah. It's a physical
has to
transfer.
be near
Yeah,
has to be near the second empty man to become the third one.
yeah,
What we see with the vessels is actually that the empty man does when he enters into a vessel, the vessels start to deteriorate and die. I do not think that they become more like the empty man, or become more like the entity.
Yeah.
What happens is that when James Lasombra goes into the hospital, that man who the empty man is using as a conduit, or the empty man, the entity, Nyarlathotep, screw it, is using as a conduit, is slowly dying, and as he is slowly dying, he is being siphoned into James.
Mhm.
I do not think that skeleton is meant to be an earlier vessel. I think it's rather supposed to be something much more ancient.
Okay.
I think that's
Because
a
if you
reasonable
actually-
theory. But then
Yeah.
who was the conduit prior to the guy from the opening? I guess.
They say that these people have 500-year plans,
Yeah.
and not just 5-year plans. And here's an
Yeah.
interesting thing about this. You guys remember this sort of like almost not really Freemasonic but cultish place they go into?
Yeah.
Where he keeps saying,
Oh yeah.
nothing can be said about reality.
Yeah.
There is no struggling. There's no loss.
Yeah. The
That-
Pontifex
that-
Institute.
That building, which the Pontifex Institute is in, or they have their headquarters, is called
Yeah.
the Telesterion. And the Telesterion.
Oh, by the way, quick
Yeah.
pointing out, I should say, Pontifex, literally translated from the Latin, means bridge builder.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Oh, wow!
You beat me to
Really?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Pope is the Pope.
Oh,
is
that's
the
not a
Pontiff.
coincidence.
He's the bridge between man and God. So yeah.
Exactly.
No,
That's
very-
amazing. That's really cool that you guys noted that. But that building is called the Telesterion, which means the initiation hall. And the ancient Telesterion was a sort of place where the place where of the worshippers of the Eleusinian mysteries went to do the rituals, from what I understood. And the Eleusinian mysteries. Let me pull up Wikipedia because I'm not gigabrain. The Eleusinian mysteries were initiations held every year for the cult of Demeter and Persephone. Note this, by the way. Note this in your mind, by the way, Tim, because I think you have something to say about this, about
Yes.
the personal experience. They were initiations held for the cult of Demeter and Persephone, based at the Pan-Hellenic sanctuary of Eleusis in ancient Greece. So here you have a sort of candidate for what could have been some secret society as a descendant of that 500 years ago. Because this movie goes into very deep things. There's an MK Ultra hint to it, by the way. If in the scene where James looks through the tapes and he sees this weird bald goblin that looks suspiciously very much like him, that is being sort of documented, and these people are like sort of like ritual, like doing these rituals around him, and I think that this thing is literally him.
Yeah, and
Staring back at him.
in that you get there's this weird sort of black shape on the wall, which I think, if I remember correctly, when James shoots the previous tulpa in the head, the blood splatter makes that shape. It's the same shape on the wall, I think, or it's a similar shape.
Yeah, it definitely. I think it definitely is supposed to hint to that being the implication.
Yeah.
And regarding the cult of Demeter and Persephone, I know that these two particular deities pertain to your particular anecdote, Tim. If you want to divulge.
Sure. So a couple years ago, I used to have a journal where I used to interview people of the occult, and I used to document the things they said out of just pure interest. I wasn't personally invested in the occult. I was just researching it, if anything. So in these journals, I once interviewed people that were of a specific sect, where they would pray to the Greek goddess Hecate, and Hecate, she has a ritual pertaining to her where it's called the Crossroads Ritual, and it's very similar. Like the similarities between that ritual and the procedure for that ritual, and like calling upon the empty man, like blowing into the bottle and he appears in the background. They're very similar in how when you invoke Hecate and it's at midnight, you do it, and you call out for, you set up a few items and you pledge to her, and she would come to you, and you would start hearing dogs barking because she comes with dogs. You would hear the whistling of keys hitting each other, the sound of metal, and dogs howling and barking, etc. Like that's how you know that she's appeared, and then you would ask whatever favor you want of her, and you would get it. So those two specific instances, I don't think was a specific coincidence. I think that was intended, in that this had a very real, like, ancient Hellenic pagan, vibe to it, in how they were invoking whatever entity this was.
Yeah.
Considering what you just mentioned about Demeter, that must have been the case, I think.
Yeah, because isn't Hecate the daughter of Persephone? Or something like that? It's one of these deities that the Eleusinian mysteries worship.
Yeah, I think so.
It's the daughter of one of them, I think.
Yeah, her parents are Perseus and Asteria.
Perseus? Perseus and Asteria, really?
Yeah. She's related to God,
up.
obviously, so.
Yeah. But I think that's interesting because you also told a detail. I don't know if you mentioned it or not, that that ritual is made in the crossroads, and crossroads are similar to bridges in their own way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
They both lead to one place to another, which is supposed to be a contrast.
Yeah. And
well, how you're met with two roads to take, right? Those two roads will, like, obviously, in physical, you can always go back and take the other road. But in terms of a spiritual sense, you can only take one of
Yeah.
those roads. And once you've taken that road, there's no changing the path you took.
At least
So it's like crossing over a bridge in that way.
not in this metaphysics,
Yeah.
of course.
I actually want to go into the metaphysics a little bit later, but uh, I want to note that right, there's a scene at one point where these teenagers are just messing around. They're sort of goth kids, sort of obnoxious towards each other. Didn't like them very much, honestly, but they do the ritual of the empty man on the bridge, and what happens is that some echo of a distant huge footstep, also denoting the giant skeleton of earlier, perhaps, I don't know, these huge footsteps in the distance, and they just run away, they scram.
Which is
Except for
another very unnerving scene.
Yeah. Yeah, and you see all of these teenagers except for the penis head one, hanged at the bottom of it, at the bottom of that bridge, and what do you know? James Lasombra is walking into that bridge, walking through that bridge, and discovers them dead. But guess which direction of the bridge he's coming from? The same direction that the whatever they heard echoing in the distance came from.
Interesting.
Damn.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting. I just really like seeing these little hints, and yeah.
Especially considering you have that scene later, where they explicitly show him creating sounds that he hears in another part of the film.
Oh yeah,
So-
you mean when the cult members are saying, "Are you here?
Yes.
Are you?" Oh yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
then and then when the entity finally takes control of him in that sort of scene, he is from the other perspective making the noises they're hearing,
Yeah.
and he sees himself reacting to the noises he's creating.
Yeah.
So he could literally be the one creating those noises on the bridge that they heard.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Because the creation of these empty men as these conduits in the metaphysics of this world seems to create some sort of time shift or something. You know, it allows them to bend time in on itself in some way to interact with itself. I don't know exactly how that works.
There's a detail about the fingers, by the way, that we were talking about earlier. There's this recurring form of gesture that they do that you told me, Jack, was called the scholars. What was it
Scholar's
called?
cradle. There's
Cradle.
various ways you can put your hands together. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a whole taxonomy of what they're called and stuff. It's kind of absurd.
Yeah, I'd imagine it is an important. I mean, it's an important part of anatomy, but you see that gesture done a lot. I actually wonder if there is perhaps a Freemasonic element to that, because
Yeah, I
I know
was
that
about to say.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a Freemasonic symbol.
Because there's those elements, but there also is a fairly sort of pedestrian sort of side of it, of literally just like lecturers will do that with their fingers and stuff, and there's various ways of sort of rules about how you're meant to shape your hands whilst you're giving a lecture to send different messages to your audience.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I guess that that ties into the fact that symbols and the way you hold your hands have like more meaning than you know, and then often like you know, this is perhaps a weakness of certain, let's say certain denominations of Christianity. When they lose certain kinds of symbolism, they can become blind to things that are right in front of them. So as an Orthodox Christian, when I see people making hand gestures, it's obvious to me that that's signaling something, or that it has a deeper meaning, because we have our own like set of hand symbols, etc., etc. Whereas if you were in not necessarily, I'm not trying to throw too much shade or anything, but you know, if you're in a system where there aren't all these hand symbols, you could get much more easily bamboozled.
Yeah.
You know, it's just
Freemasonry is an obvious example.
and because we're canonically not allowed to be Freemasons, whereas certain denominations.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and Paul's just mentioned as well that the very, very beginning of the second section of the film, like after the intro, the main character, La Sombra, is jogging over that bridge, or he's jogging over a bridge. So it's hinting to like the fact that he's the guy making the noise and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That opening scene is also very interesting because I think the first thing you see of him is him jogging over the bridge, and then his birthday, and the birthday is obviously his actual birthday. That's when he started to exist.
Yeah, that's the crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's going over the bridge from the other side, and then he begins to exist.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting, and I think. Did I want to say anything else about this? I think how regarding the metaphysics of the empty man, I think it's actually a little confused because at some point there's like a monistic, there's a monistic sort of implication that all there really is the empty man, the entity.
Yeah.
The entity is everything that exists, and that all categories break down. That there's only him that is left, and now you always see this imagery of him being the black chaos, the void, the nothingness, which the guy in the
which we get with the
Telesterion-
posters that they'll have, the black poster.
Yeah, and the Telesterion, that building as well. The Pontifex guy says there is only the nothingness of things.
That's,
so there's this heavy Buddhist aspect of
sort
it.
of interesting because I won't talk about this too much because it's a whole other film. But it's one that Jay Dars talked about called The Night House that came out this year, and the sort of malevolent entity in that is also literally nothing. Like it's just interesting that two films with a similar sort of nothingness as the entity came out so close to each other, I suppose.
Yeah, the irony is, of course, that in these systems, their nothingness has substance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas,
you disessentialize essence and you essentialize inexistence.
Yeah.
You put essence into what does not have essence, and you remove the notion of essence into things that actually exist.
I would say it's more substance rather than essence, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm
To be
thinking
technical.
essence in like
To
an
be
abstract
technical.
sense, yeah.
To be technical.
I think there's that angle of it. Maybe this is just me being a little autistic, but I think that the movie is actually a little confused about its metaphysic because sometimes there's a monist aspect of it, that there's only nothingness. But then there's a dualistic aspect of it, where there's psyche, which then contains the unconscious, and then the external world, which is a part of the unconscious. There's this dualistic split, where one relates to the other, and the bridge between them.
Yeah.
Could that be, however, a tool, an actual tool that they use, as a red herring in the beginning, to make you think that, hey, the world we're in is the normal world, which there's dualism here, and then it over time it kind of like
collapses.
Becomes more and more apparent that there isn't any truth to it. It's just chaos. Perhaps that was intended.
But yeah, that's. I think that might also that might be intended, as you say, because a lot of esotericism, a lot of Gnosticism, and the occult is very, I mean, etymologically means very similar to Gnosticism, because occult meaning secret and Gnosticism meaning knowledge and knowledge of secret things. So I think you could almost equivocate Gnosticism and the occult and mystery religions as a whole, because I think those are also sort of lumped into the same similar category. The way that they function is that there's like a successive revelation as you rise in the hierarchy of the religious structure. And from what I've understood, high-ranking occultists ranking in what? I won't say. Out of well, yeah. Uh, High-ranking occultists will do the nihilistic, solipsistic conclusion of saying there is no logic, I am God,
Yeah.
and
Well, even
There
higher
is a-
ranking ones than that will then go a step further, but will remain optical for now.
yeah, there is a particular essay that I don't know if you can trust or not, but there's reasons to believe that you can see it's legit. That explains a little bit about higher ranks of occults, but we won't talk about that here. Uh, that that essay blew my mind a little bit personally. Uh, but then in the movie, you see this later sort of interpretation of the beliefs of the cult, where the realm of psyche, the noosphere, contains many different types of consciousness, but the noosphere is the sum of all consciousness. So it's not necessarily a unity; it's just the entire multiplicity. So you have the humans, perhaps animals, and then you have these ancient things, and then you have the entity, the grand entity, the swirling black chaos, as that cult
Yeah.
member said. That when he begins to fully, excuse me for using this rather heavy theological word, incarnate, but I think that this makes sense in the context of the movie.
Yeah, that's fair.
When he incarnates,
Manifest, maybe, or incarnate, yeah.
manifests, yeah. When he incarnates, he basically removes all categories as an effect of his manifestation.
I think I just want to quickly point out there's an interesting,
Yeah.
if you want to make a very quick comparison, we celebrated the real incarnation not too long ago.
Yeah.
We see the difference between, in this case, they use a fake thing in their brains to incarnate their god, and it's, for lack of a better set of words, he doesn't choose. There's no free will in it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in reality and in Christianity, we have the Theotokos. It was of her own free will, and then it's like a manifestation of an actual, of the word. And it's sort of an interesting comparison between these two things, that they're complete. It's a complete inversion. Like, number one, it's a man. Number two, it's not no choice, no free will, not consensual. And then it's this chaos. Whereas in the reality, we have the incarnation of, logic and truth itself, and order itself in Christ, the second person of the Godhead, through a woman, and through free will. I just thought it was an interesting comparison.
Absolutely. That's I love that you said that. By the way, that's very important. Good to remember the good things.
Yes.
This really
Stay anchored.
dark
Stay
movie.
anchored.
Yeah. And I think that's really pretty interesting to see the sort of feminine aspect of James Lasombra here. He's a
Yeah.
feminine, symbolically he's feminine.
Yeah.
This.
Receptive.
And he is also, there's also like a sexual assault aspect to it, with the rather xenomorph-like entity that enters him forcefully.
Yep.
Which is just put in the context of what you just said, absolutely horrible. Like,
Yeah.
wow. And I think, going back to what I was saying, there's this interpretation done by the cult member that instead of putting the dissolution of categories and chaos as the presupposition of how to view the world, he rather says that the dissolution of categories is then the result of the entity entering into reality, instead of and that's really interesting. And I think there, Jay Dyer says that he sees sort of like an Antichrist
Yeah.
view
Yeah.
of this.
Because it's a raising up of the lowest of, it's the raising up of quote unquote non-existent substancelessness to the level of reality. So it is a complete inversion of like our incarnation, the real incarnation.
Yeah, and it's interesting there as well because you see this sort of ending where the entity enters the empty man, La Sombra, as there's this part of the scene where it almost has empowering music. There's a sort of positive chord playing.
Mm.
And here it goes into another part of my thesis about this movie. You see this empowering sort of theme playing in this symphonic piece playing as he is being entered into. And what happens is that you see the people bowing before him. You see a flashback of him fornicating or being like
Adulterous.
being adulterous with that woman. So there's this sort of like fulfillment of desire and self-realization as his self is being destroyed by this forceful entry.
Yeah.
But he was nothing from the beginning, and this thing is coming here to destroy all categories. Therefore, the categories of real and unreal. Therefore, what he was not, he will now become.
Yeah.
So there's this sort of disturbing empowerment in the ending.
Yeah.
As the son of perdition, as Jay Dyer would have put it in his analysis of the Empty Man. You should go watch that, by the way. That's a very good analysis.
Yeah.
And that's why I think this movie is not supposed to show the occult in a necessarily negative light. It's just this very weirdly revealing light in an which is obscure in putting value in these concepts.
Mm. I think this movie is very much. I don't think that the director is like saying that this is good or anything. I think it's more like it's almost like an essay explaining a particular kind of worldview rather than anything else, I would say. Whereas a movie like, say, Rosemary's Baby is more like a kind of a revelation of the method, like pretty explicit case of the director sort of saying, actually, this is based in a sort of roundabout way. Whereas this movie, I don't necessarily see that. I see what you're saying. Like, I think the ending is supposed to be, kind of shocking in like its completeness and its like thesis that is like this is how reality kind of is, but I don't know if there's a judgment that it's a good thing necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, the movie metaphysically does not make sense. You could pre-sup it in 2 seconds flat, obviously. I don't think the person who made the movie thinks that any of this is real because it makes no fucking sense.
Yeah.
But the portrayal
that
of it
speaks to occultism, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you have your opinions about it, and you've said about that before, that you do feel bad for these people ultimately. Would you say that's true, Tim?
Yes, I do, because in regards to these people, we're talking about the occultists, they're in pursuit of something that they want reality and they want truth, and they're in pursuit of that, and they're going about it the entirely wrong way. Like I said earlier, like if something is true, why would it be hidden from you? What's the purpose of that? That's why specifically what is associated with that of the divine and with good is always orderly, whereas things that aren't that is the opposite of that, is chaos.
Yeah.
So chaos is scary to the human mind because chaos is inherently something that can't be understood. Something that can't be understood can't be known. Something that can't be known is by default scary to the human consciousness. It's what the root of fear is.
And another point to what you, sorry, just to jump in, what you said, like in Romans, Paul says, the law is written on our hearts. So what is true is obvious in a certain sense. Like it is clear. It is not, like you said, it's not hidden.
That's why I like to see Christianity as something that is exoteric as opposed to esoteric. It invites people in.
Yeah.
Now, sure, there are things within Christianity that we don't teach to people, but that's out of goodwill. We don't want them to do things that they're not spiritually ready for. For example, having people read the Philokalia. We wouldn't want that with newly
Yeah.
initiated people.
Yeah.
But that's not because, it's this hidden thing, you have to be like level 500 to understand it. No, it's not that.
Yeah.
It's about maturity, spiritual maturity specifically,
Yeah.
in how to handle these concepts. That's not what it is with arcane knowledge in occult circles.
Yeah.
There, it's a specific demonic. I would say it's alluring. Alluring would be the correct word to use it. It's alluring by demons. The demons are alluring you by attracting you with all the secret mysteries and all the vague things surrounding it. So it becomes a concept of curiosity killed the cat. You start being curious, what could this possibly be? So you enter onto this entire process of trying to find out what all of this is, and all you're left with at the end is, there was nothing here. I was just being trolled by demons. And that's why I feel bad for occultists, because at the end of their journey, they find that they've just spent their entire time playing the games of the demons, while the truth was right in front of them the entire time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that speaks beautifully to the difference between these two movies. Circling back around, because in the Empty Man, you have this detective who is searching for this. What's going on here? These people are dying, etc., etc. He's going deeper into the cult. He's going deeper into Bohemian Grove, and what he finds, the solution of all categories, chaos.
Yeah.
Nothing is real. That speaks for the
I
occult.
think the way to sort of differentiate them is that A Dark Song is a film about occultism, where it is ultimately revealed that it is a waste of time, that the truth is Christian, it's Christ, and God.
Yeah.
Whereas The Empty Man is almost entertaining the idea, or sort of trying to explore the idea of what if the truth wasn't God? What if it was this this awful? So I don't even know. Like, I suppose they are Buddhist, sort of bizarre Cthulhu type spiritualism. What if that was the truth? And it's not a good one.
No.
Yeah.
You know what I think that is actually, Jack? I think that movie perfectly portrays what the world would look like if that sort of worldview was entertained.
Yeah.
Because that world makes no sense. There is this guy being incarnated in the form of a tulpa, and the entire world, like, time doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
You don't know where it began, when it ends. A lot of weird things are happening where people can't connect the
Time
timelines.
bends in on itself and connects back. Yeah.
Ultimately, it's all chaos. So that shows, like, in a way, that movie, like The Empty Man, kind of proves our point in terms of presuppositions, is that that worldview makes no sense, and that is perfectly displayed in that movie.
And contrasting that to A Dark Song, I'd say in A Dark Song, Solomon always says to Sophia, "What do you actually want? Tell me the truth. What is it? You're an idiot. Here's what it actually is like. Why aren't you following the proper form? Why aren't you following the order that I have given you, etc., etc., etc." Until she messes it all up, and she finally sees, she clicks, "Oh, it was obvious all along. What she said from the beginning, I don't do forgive it, I have to forgive."
Yeah.
That was a truth that was itching. She has an itch in the brain, as in The Empty Man it said. The itch in her brain was the truth that she was constantly denying. But I think Solomon might have unconsciously tried to urge her towards. And the truth was the holy things, the real forgiveness. And that contrasts beautifully to The Empty Man. I think it's really important that we chose these two.
Yeah, I think it's
I
extremely
mean, it's what Flood
fortuitous.
said earlier too.
Actually, I think that even though they weren't made intentionally to be this way, obviously, because the creators didn't communicate, I think you do actually get more out of them watching these two together, having the ability to contrast them. Like, it's this weird thing that happens sometimes where two films made separately complement each other, and you're able to get more out of each of them by watching them together almost.
Yeah.
And I really like what Flood said earlier in that her name is Sophia, which means wisdom in Greek, and
Yeah.
her form of wisdom in the beginning is this worldly kind of wisdom. In her mind, it is justified that she should seek revenge, avenge her dead son, and then when she's met with divinity, she realizes even further wisdom in that forgiveness is the way. So that I think was a very powerful way of looking at that. It's
Yeah.
definitely but probably what I think was intended as well. Like there can't be a coincidence. Her name is Sophia, to be honest.
No.
It could not be. It's such
I
an
don't-
obvious.
I
I
really
mean,
don't think so.
Sophia and Solomon, and
So, yeah,
Solomon
Solomon, yeah.
in Proverbs like very explicitly talks of Sophia, so
Yeah.
it could not be a coincidence.
I doubt that. That's the biggest thing I doubt about this movie, that those two names are coincidences. That's the
Yeah.
biggest thing I doubt about that movie.
Just makes too much sense. And
Yeah.
and an interesting thing is between these two movies, right? They're both about the occult, but they approach it very differently.
Yeah,
And those are that's the nuance that isn't shown in a lot of the movies that you might watch about the occult. Obviously, since the occult itself is so, there's so much to talk about. There's so much depth and so much mystery surrounding it, that all of that almost takes up, like if you think about it in terms of like RAM, right? Or in terms of like computing memory, all of that memory goes to just displaying all those mysteries, and not so much goes into actually going into the discrepancies and the nuances that those things might imply.
yeah,
I think these two movies do that pretty well in that they've actually spared some part of the memory to actually go into the nuances of the movie, because they don't have an explicit bias. The movies don't tell you that the occult is good or bad. It's ultimately left up to you.
yeah,
Like in this specific case with the Empty Man, how you might watch that movie and you might get an interesting feeling. Oh wow, this is a cool world where nothing makes sense. Where someone else might say, "Wow, this world sucks.
yeah.
It's chaos." I don't think anyone in their right mind would like that world, but yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I think there's also an element at the end of A Dark Song where she doesn't necessarily herself realize what's happened.
Yeah,
Because, I suppose because she was obviously, because you have that scene where she, I think, is it her sister she's talking to?
Yes.
yeah,
That's, who's obviously, she's a Christian, She asks her, is what you're doing godly?
Mm.
So, they're sort of imagining what would happen after, it's like, hopefully, she would
realize.
think on it, reflect on what's happened,
Yeah,
and realize what had actually happened. It wasn't the ritual working,
yeah.
But it isn't specifically stated in the film.
No.
And that's I think that's sort of what happens in real life sometimes, things happen to you and you aren't initially sure, what was the purpose behind them, was that God intervening in your life? I mean, that's happened to me. As a become a Christian, I look back on parts of my life and I realize, what had actually been happening.
Mm.
Yeah.
Glory to God.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen, man. By the way, just one final little detail. You guys talk about the skeleton.
Yeah.
The many arms. I think I'm very certain that that's supposed to mean something about the Buddha, and the thing that they whispered as they were looking at him was this, and
Yeah.
in that I think I heard something about bodhisattva, which means
Yeah, you mentioned that.
yeah, it's someone who is in the process of becoming a Buddha, and the Buddha being someone who has emptied himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I was
So
saying.
Buddhism is just straight up demonic, isn't it? Like,
Whoa. Yeah.
Whoa!
like, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but this movie has red pill me on Buddhism. Like,
Yeah.
is that an accurate way of thinking about Buddhism, or should it be a bit more?
I mean, there's maybe slightly more nuance to it.
Like,
I'll say this much. In Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future by Father Seraphim Rose, he says that Zen Buddhism is probably one of the closer religions, but that's like the Japanese version of
yeah,
Buddhism,
the
which
Japanese
is slightly
practice,
different. Which is slightly different to. So Zen Buddhism incorporates elements of Taoism a bit more, which again, Taoism is probably the closest just pure, like
Even
brain,
even
big
closer than
brain.
Islam,
Yeah,
or like
closer than. Well, I mean that's a different question. But Taoism is sort of one of the closer purely man-made
non-Abrahamic.
philosophies. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean it's. I don't want to get into. I don't want to necessarily get into that sort of argument, but
That's what.
yeah, no, Buddhism and Hinduism. It's just
Yeah.
they're
Hinduism
nonsense.
is just it's type of paganism.
It's there's no point there's no point
Yeah.
Here's
in
But
ranking them.
something.
those images are sent in voice chat though. What is the bottom one around?
I think that's a statue of Buddha.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a tradition in which he's depicted with many arms.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what it means, but it parallels very closely to the skeleton.
It does. I mean, he has the two main arms are clasped together,
Yeah,
and then he has the other arms arrayed
Yeah.
behind him. Yeah.
And I think if you're looking at this from like a religious perspective, this seems to be a sacrilege of Buddhism.
And then
In a way.
yeah.
and then he has those two other arms down the bottom holding something. What is he holding?
I don't know.
Yeah,
He's
for
holding
sure.
a whole
Oh,
bunch of stuff in the
In
other
That
one.
seems
his
to seems to be a
bottoms are-
bottle. That's
Yeah,
a bottle.
clasped together. with
Yeah.
those.
Oh damn.
Because in there's concept art for that skeleton, and in the original concept art, he has another set of hands that are holding like a flute or flask looking thing.
Yeah.
So that's probably a direct reference to that sculpture.
That's
That's-
interesting.
Yeah.
Basically, we're looking at a picture of the many-armed Buddha
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the listeners. So, yeah. Sorry, this is not a
We
visual
do this
podcast.
live.
Yeah.
We figure these things out live.
Man.
Yeah.
This,
So yeah, Paul's mentioned this is Tibetan Buddhism rather than Zen
Yep.
Buddhism.
Yeah.
Obviously. Yeah. Based on the
I've
opening.
heard.
Yeah.
I've heard that that branch of Buddhism has more like pagan syncretism, from what I've understood.
Tibetan or Zen?
Tibetan.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Tibetan is yeah.
I
But
think,
again, I'm not an expert on Eastern religions, so
So I know there's
And I-
one thing,
I
that Buddhism has a concept of ego death,
Yeah.
which is supposed to be rather different than how it's portrayed in this movie. In ego death, spiritually, is supposed to be you letting go of your ego and all those bad things tied to it.
Yeah.
And
the
this
thing-
is supposed to be you killing your pride.
E-
But this is portrayed very differently in this movie, however.
No, I don't. I think ego death in Buddhism is letting go of like your hypostasis completely. Like it's
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it's completely unpersoning yourself. It's not necessarily to do with getting rid of pride in the way that Christians think of getting
People,
rid of your because
yeah.
when we think of purity, we don't think of abstaining from good and bad. We think of abstaining from the bad, abstaining from the substancelessness, and moving towards God. Whereas in other religions, it's a complete unpersoning of yourself. So it's removing the good and the bad, because obviously as persons we're made in the image of God, whereas they don't have that conception.
Yeah, it's ego dissolution. It's not quite like
Yeah. It's
what
not ego
ego
death as
dissolution.
in becoming humble.
pretty much.
Yeah, which is very
I think
different.
thinking about the chaos thing that we talked about a little earlier. Tim mentioned it in particular. I think chaos, you could define it as the dissolution of categories. And
Yeah.
Chaos, I think, is only valuable when you have incorrect, deeply sort of rooted categories. I'm taking the way I'm saying this is sort of like almost Jordan Peterson-y, but I think it's let's look at it from this perspective for like 2 seconds. Yeah, I mean, chaos is only valuable if you really need to remove like a deep-seated fallacy. But if you have the sort of real dichotomy between order and chaos isn't real, I think it's more order and potentia, or potentiality is the potential for something, and that's when the form takes uh, asserts its order into substance, and when you have the full truth in Christianity, there's no need for chaos. It's just potentiality. The earth is potentiality. The earth is not chaos. The ocean you can symbolize as chaos because it's always moving and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
it is interesting little concepts. But yeah, order and chaos is as a dichotomy is a very, very pagan sort of Gnostic thing, and I would not use it really as a conceptual scheme in a way.
Yeah.
That's Man, this has been an amazing chat, by the way. I think.
This has been a good episode for sure.
Yeah.
It is a rabbit hole.
Absolutely, these are riddled with them.
Man, I haven't even looked at my notes at all. That's okay. I mean, that's good. That means it was a good conversation. Is there anything else? I don't know. What else is there?
I suppose you want to do a direct comparison.
I could say this before we finish it all off. This is not related to all the.
We might have a whole other section. I mean, Aram, did you want to do a more straight up like comparison between the two?
We can do that once Tim has said what he wanted to say.
No, I was just about to say the musical scores of these movies were absolutely stunning.
The sound design of The Empty Man was like the sound of the or whatever it was. It was like kind of like throat singing almost. Yeah. It was so
very powerful.
Oh, that reminded me. The other thing it kind of reminded me of was in 2001. Whenever you see the black, which is kind of an interesting side point, is
the monolith.
Whenever you see the monolith, you get that extremely loud like musical score. It kind of reminded me of that.
And in a dark song, they have this like this. I don't know what it's like. There's some form of instrument where the notes are descending all the time, like da, which adds like this way. It sounds like a cow dying, and that adds on to the horror, in my opinion. Yeah. It's not like a jump scare type of thing. It's just atmospheric horror, which is my favorite type of horror.
Oh, it's extreme. Yeah. I don't know which of these. Like both of these movies are pretty disturbing, but I guess the positive ending of A Dark Song, like you don't feel as cooked after watching it, even though like A Dark Song probably has a much more explicitly disturbing scene in the demons torturing her in the basement of the house. But, I would say Empty Man is much spookier, much spookier, personally.
Yeah,
I think
it's entertaining the idea that that this is the way the world actually works, which is much scarier than
that's the Lovecraftian element of it, I guess. I think A Dark Song, personally, I thought that one was scarier because of the like constant tension of oh crap, stuff is about to go down, and it's really scary. But overall, I think that one was scary. But I think The Empty Man had these individual moments that were super creepy, but a little tropey, a little cliche. When the Empty Man was entering into the house.
Yeah, that was a little cliche.
Yeah,
but
on the nose. But
But
that got me. I was a sucker for that one.
Yeah, I would say A Dark Song is a more unique film, perhaps, in a way.
I think it's the only film I've seen which, like, as you mentioned before, Jack, like gives you like a very explicit and realistic depiction of what these how these rituals actually work, because it is
it isn't teenagers messing around on a Ouija board.
Yeah, it is like a super long process. It's similar to a whole liturgical cycle for us in the church. Like that's how these rituals, because they were set up to be, when Aleister Crowley wrote them, to be inversions of, in particular, say, Catholic rituals and things like that, like with the Black Mass and things like that. So, in terms of like the commitment level to them, it is similar to church. So it is a whole ritual, hours and hours long. So yeah, it's very unique in that sense. The film.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that Satanists, some branch of Luciferianism, I don't know, there's like 500 of these. They're as splintered as Protestants are. They have like an inverted version of the Nicene Creed somehow.
I don't even want to think about
Yeah.
that.
They explicitly they intentionally invert things.
Yeah.
It's not. I think it's a little incorrect to view it as if it was.
Isn't them
yeah.
intentionally inverting them, admitting like.
Oh yeah, because that's
if
what
they
Satanists.
inverting them.
Yeah, Satanists do believe. It's in the same sense that in the Gospels.
Well, these
demons...
Gnostics don't. They don't believe in God necessarily, do they? Or at the very least,
the
they
higher up
purposely
ones do know what they're doing. The higher up ones do know what they're doing. So so in the Gospels, you have demons constantly saying to Christ, get away from me, Son of Man, because they know the truth, but they still persist in what they're doing. I mean, that's a slightly different topic as to why demons persist, but higher levels of occultists understand that they are directly in opposition to the triune God of Christianity. They understand that explicitly, but
I don't get how you could. I don't know.
Likelihood is there, Jack, is that they have a completely different metaphysics as to what God is.
I mean, every day we sin and we do bad things, and we understand God, so it's the same sort of thing. To a different degree, perhaps, or a different way.
They're just unashamed of it, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's like the sort of the sin that the Pharisees commit when they know that Christ is the actual Son of God, Messiah, but they still deny him to his face.
Yeah.
And that's sort of similar to what they're doing. That's one of the gravest sins you can do, I'd imagine. I think that's, from what I've understood, I might be completely wrong, but I think that's what it said by the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. Denying, yeah.
It's not a unrecoverable sin though, obviously, because Peter denied Christ.
Yeah.
But it's one of the
anyway,
of the worst.
I don't want to necessarily get into
yeah.
As much as I'm obviously happy to talk about that, but we don't need to get into gospel interpretation right now.
No.
Yeah, I don't know if we explicitly mentioned it, but yeah, episode 33. Weird occult synchronicity here. I think it was just meant to be, I guess, for this episode.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But was there? So did you want to get into a direct comparison between the metaphysics, or is there more you guys wanted to say?
I mean, I think in terms of the Dark Song, I think the only thing I can comment is the way that occultists view things more morally. We've talked about how they view good and evil as just two modes of behavior, but not as an ethical imperative towards one or the other.
Yeah.
So it's not good and evil in the ethical sense. It's just in the sort of categorical sense.
Yeah, dualistic sense.
Yeah, and I think that shows perfectly in the choice of deities they invoke. Who was it? Horus, Baal, Christ?
It was Horus, Orpheus, Baal, and Christ.
Wow. Yeah. That's funny in a depressing way because you see these TikTok witches. Yeah. I'm gonna tie it to that. These TikTok witches who invoke these random whatever, and they do whatever, and they think it's
I remember.
They think it's actual magic.
I remember I remember when they tried to organize together to simultaneously attack Allah.
Oh yeah.
and they lost. They admitted that they
One
lost
of
to
them
Allah.
they made a Reddit post, right? He's so powerful.
Yeah.
Do not approach him alone.
So dumb.
Yeah.
I think that was just. I don't even. It was just dumb. You know, I think the one saving grace for all those dumb TikTok girls is that they're dumb, and they're not actually.
Yeah.
They're
They're
not
not
malicious. They're just.
They're just not. They're not doing these full rituals or anything. I mean, yeah, Lord have mercy on them.
Hopefully not.
We are dealing with smarter people than that for sure.
Oh yeah, in these films, yeah. With regard to did anyone else have any other thoughts or things they wanted to bring up?
No, not really.
No, I don't think so.
I think. I think we've done a pretty. I mean, we've gone 2 hours 10 minutes. Pretty good.
Oof.
This was a very meaty episode. You know, like sometimes I prefer to have one crappy movie and one good movie because then you get a bit of meat and then you get a bit of fluff. Whereas we've got 2 meaty movies, so it always ends up going a lot longer, which is good though. I think this was a really very good episode. A lot to unpack, a lot to get out of it. These are 2 extremely good movies. I think this is the first time I would recommend actually, as Jack said, watching them back to back, like Empty Man then A Dark Song. I'd recommend the 2 in the double feature format, which is pretty rare for this show. Normally we say just one of them is good or both are good and just do whatever. But yeah, I think the double feature format we've selected here is pretty perfect viewing experience.
I agree. Though I must say, just from an overview, A Dark Song is this like most excruciating view of like the entire a ritualistic process, and that is more atmospheric and difficult to get through. There's not a lot of hooks that you clamp onto you. You have to be attentive. While the Empty Man is sort of like
Thriller.
Oh, look at that! Oh, look
Yeah.
at that! Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a thriller. So maybe you want to take Dark Song first, primes you, and Empty Man later. Sort of ties it off. I don't know.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
could be it. Like you could marinate in that occult understanding from A Dark Song, and then that would be a nice entrance for you to enter into.
I just
Empty
think
Man.
because the Dark Song has the nice ending, it'd be a good
Yeah.
way to end the double feature, so you wouldn't leave it feeling so depressed.
I
Yeah.
think for the
Ooh,
sake of your
good
soul,
idea.
watch a Dark Song second, yeah.
Yeah, I think
That's a good idea.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Do you guys have anything else you want to add?
No, I think we're done here
Um,
actually. Unless
I suppose props to Ken Bartholomew, the guy who designed the Empty Man creature, because he did not get credit for it. So
He didn't get
Wow.
credit.
Oh yeah.
he was not credited in the film. So
What? Why?
that's a shame.
I don't know why, because I think he designed in like 2016. And the film was made in
Ah.
2020, and they forgot to credit him or something. So props to
That's
him.
shitty.
He did a fantastic job. So
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I think we recommend both movies in the order suggested. Thank you very much. I was a bit worried having 4 people on. Would this be too hectic, too much going on? But I think this was perfect. Everyone had their own things. This is a turning point in the show. I think this is a great episode. I was really happy with it. Thank you, Aram, for coming on and like giving us the ideas for the episodes. Thanks, Jack, of course, and thanks, Tim,
Thank you.
Big Underwear, who I've linked to your YouTube. Do you want to give a quick plug to what you're all about on Big Underwear?
I am his
Yeah.
official. I am his official schizo poster in his comment section, by the way.
Yeah, that's true. No, I'd like to thank Flooded for having me on. It's a great honor. Thank you.
Me
And yeah, my channel is mostly just gaming videos. You guys can subscribe. I do occasional story time, and I am planning to start my own podcast as well. It'll be called Schizo Sundays.
Very
What we're
nice.
doing now in this chat, kind of like that. We'll just casually talk about occult stuff sometimes, like true crime, mysteries, and things that could be solved. Anything in between. The only difference is it's not going to be in movie format. When we're talking about movies, it's going to be, just any articles at all. Hopefully, I'll have all of you on my podcast one day. So
Awesome.
we'll see how that goes. Yeah,
Awesome.
thank you for having me on.
Yeah,
Nice.
thank you, man.
Yeah.
It's been awesome. It's
Yeah.
been really cool.
This was a great episode. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much again to all my guests. Check out Big Underwear. Make sure to follow me and Jack on Twitter. I'm assuming everyone already does.
I'm a
And
ghost. I'm nowhere.
and then Narama's a ghost. All right. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.